phenomenal. We got some great things lined up for you going ahead. We've been really caught up in preparing for our our 10th gala next week, which will be celebrating 63 years of the Voice and Viewpoint in San Diego. And we are also now entering the 196th year of the black press in America, dating back to 1827. So these are valuable times, and we're mentioning this as we move into Black History Month. Have an editorial this week that talks about what we should be doing with the title of the attack on Black History Month and what we must do. So Dr. Thompson, there's a lot going on. I'm excited about it, and I think we're going to get folks motivated to join us on many of these things.
Yes, Dr. Warren. Again, happy Black History Month to you. Again, people without a voice cannot be heard, and so the Voice and Viewpoint is not only just an information and teaching moment, but it is truly Black history personified. 52 weeks out of the year. They say 724. We're giving out good information, and just excited about what is taking place over here in the city of San Diego. And one of the things I love about the paper is that although it is locally originated right here in San Diego, the global impact that it's having not only just in the United States but throughout the world is amazing. To be able to say that you can get, and the Voice and Viewpoint is in the White House as well as the jailhouse, making a necessary difference in what they are doing. And so it's exciting to be a part of this history. And, I just got to say, it's great working with a living legend.
We got to watch that one, boy. Those legends can stretch reality. But, it is exciting, Dr. Thompson. And I know you talk about the countries that listen to GOD radio. And I would share with people when our analytics person start reporting that China was one of our most frequent reviewers, spending time on which pages and articles, because we track the time in terms of which pictures people look at. And China was spending so much time on our site that we went and strengthened our firewall because we weren't sure what was happening. Then we had Pakistan, Indonesia, Norway. We couldn't understand all of this. The United Kingdom, Mexico, countries in Africa, Japan, and just all of these countries. And it took me a while to kind of figure out what was happening until the Assistant Secretary for Global Affairs from the U.S. Department of State came here to San Diego to meet with me and to talk to me about what we were doing. And then I realized that America was trying to catch up with people like Japan, who was already making demands that the African nations be given a seat on the Security Council. And here President Biden mentions that last month after all these nations met. But I realized that these countries were looking at our paper because we had become an indicator of what's happening in America and what people were thinking and what they were doing. And so I'm excited that we are here. I'm excited to start this month off with you. We do Black History every week, 52 weeks a year, but we're going to crank up some real special things on it this year.
Well, I have to, before we get into Black history, we're going to take a little history as a whole. The second State of the Union by President Joe Biden last night. What were your thoughts on it? I think that I'll just start off by saying I think that he did a good presentation, and some folks walked into some things that they didn't know they were going to walk into.
Well, I enjoyed talking with my wife as we watched that last night because, remember, I grew up on Capitol Hill. When my kids were 12, Chyler and Charles, I took them on a trip to Washington, carried them through all of the secret passageways of the Capitol, the old Supreme Court chamber. And I was sharing with my wife last night that statuary hall that they now hold press conferences in. Congress used to meet in that hall, and I think it was Benjamin Franklin. He used to sit in a certain place, and people used to think that he was asleep, and he kept his head down all the time over there. Well, what they later learned was that the opposition party was on the other side of the room, but because of the structure of the room, everything they said went down, bounced up, went in the ceiling and came down, and all he had to do was just hold his head over, and he could hear their conversations.
Okay.
And they didn't realize that it was happening, that the room had been designed like that, you know. So that's the hall where we have now statues of Shirley Chisholm, where we never had black people before. We moved some of the old rebel rednecks from the Confederate, took their statues out. I remember when they put the statue of the King of Hawaii in, with all the color of the black and gold, and how people just kind of marveled at that was happening. And we've come so far to that. And so last night was special. Many years, the congressman used to try to get me to go to the State of the Union message. And long before designated survivor, I had figured out that everybody in the chain of succession was in the room at one time. And if somebody blew that room up, America would have gone into chaos. So I would never go. I was just paranoid about that. And at one point, they did try to set off a bomb in the men's room in the Capitol. But to see you've got the judges there for the Supreme Court, all of the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of the cabinet members, all the people. And last night we had a notable absence of Judge Clarence Thomas. He wasn't there, and I don't remember the reasons, but just as well that he wasn't, with all the stuff that he's been doing. And then we had some very disturbing things, like Krista Sinema showing up in that yellow dress with the big sleeves after she declared her independence to try to weaken the count that the Democrats now had in the Senate. And to have Marjorie Taylor Greene back there calling a president a liar. I mean, Democrats things that just were so undiplomatic and that would not have been tolerated. And it started when President Obama was giving the State of the Union message, and that congressman from South Carolina called the president a liar in the middle of his speech. And I think they censored him for it at the time. And we have gone so far in the opposite direction that the Speaker of the House would sit there and try to ignore the president's speech. But the president was shrewd enough to speak, so he had to get up. And he handled all their little tricks. And I was telling my wife, I said, you know what? They forget something about Joe Biden. He spent 38 years in the Senate, 8 years as vice president. He was there when some of them weren't even born. And one guy from Florida was talking about he grew up listening to the State of the Union on the radio, and it was just surreal for him to be in the audience and to be there. And another one, he was excited because he had just married an immigrant and 2 years ago when they were there. And so, as Biden said, America is still strong, but to hear Sarah Huckabee, who was Trump's press secretary for 2 years, give the rebuttal, and you would have thought you were on another planet. If ever there was a statement of what was called an alternate reality, she made it. And you wouldn't believe you're in the same country with all the lies that she told. And yet she went back home, press secretary, went back to Arkansas. Her father had been governor before her. He's the one always on television there promoting everything. And those people make her governor, okay? And so not giving too much attention to her, I like to switch to the fact that we have Westmore in Maryland as the third African-American governor of a state. And that's a good thing, that what he was doing, that we could see Ketanji Brown Jackson there with the Supreme Court in her role, sitting next to that crazy woman that Trump put on the bench. You know, there might not be enough to make a majority, but there was still good things there.
Well, you know, one of the things that I did like is that they could say what they want to say about Mitt Romney, but he sure did tell the young man, look,
George Santos, you don't belong here.
You don't belong here. You're a disgrace. And so he went home and he posted on his Twitter account, "You'll never be president."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so childish.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Romper Room without a supervisor in the room.
Yeah.
You know, and the Republicans, they had to stand on some of the stuff because he jammed them so well. And see, I want people to understand something. The only reason they're concerned about Biden running a next time, being 82 and going into a term where they are afraid actuarially that he might die, and if Kamala Harris is vice, she gets to be president. That's what the issue really is, because her rating has been dropping as they're trying to mount a tax on her to see if they can get him to push her out. But if he pushes her off the ticket for his reelection, he can kiss it goodbye, because it was black people that put him in, and we will live with the grand wizard before we acknowledge folks doing the kind of things that are an insult to all of us.
Yeah, one of the things that I did like about the speech more than anything else, it wasn't so long that you wanted to turn it off. I think that he hit great points and then he left it alone.
Well, I thought the length of the speech was not as important as the content. And most countries, the leaders like Mexico, I've seen it in Russia, when they do their equivalent of what is the state of the country message, I've seen some of those messages go on for an hour and a half,
Yeah.
2 hours. And I mean, people don't have no option but to listen. But Biden was shrewd enough to make it interesting because when he mentioned the things that had been done, then he would say, let's finish the job, finish the job. And that was a very shrewd and smart move. And so I think he did very well with it. You know, I like for people when we hear of the State of the Union, so many of us know so little about history. There was a poem, and I can't remember who wrote it, called "The Ship of State," and the words of the poem that go to the State of the Union went like this: "Thou too sail on, O ship of state, sail on, O Union strong and great. Humanity, with all its fears, with all its hopes for future years, is hanging breathlessly in thy fate." And so that's why he closed it by saying America is strong. Yes, we are strong in spite of the madness that we have going on. And if you want to look at the attack on democracy, you know, I was just rereading Carter G. Woodson, I believe in 1921. He wrote a book, because he wrote about 12 books. He wrote one book called Color and Democracy. And it went to this meeting that took place in 1944 at the Dumbarton House, where the groundwork was being laid for the United Nations. And he talked about how the big countries were willing to talk about world peace, but they only wanted to talk about people of color as the dominated entities and not as equal partners.
Yeah.
And so we need to pay attention because there's an inscription on the archives in Washington that says, "What is past is prologue." And the reason people work so hard to stamp out our history and our culture, because if they know that if you know who you are, then you know what you can do and where you can go.
Yeah.
And so we've come this far in spite.
Yeah, and the author of that poem that you just talked about was a college president by the name of Henry W. Longfellow. Henry W. Longfellow.
I'm so sorry, and I was such a fan of Longfellow. I just missed that one, but thank you.
Yeah. So you know, we did our due diligence on the highlights of the presidential State of the Union. Let's backtrack a little bit and let's start talking about African American History Month. I don't know if we call it Black History Month, African American History Month. You know, I think it's synonymous. But talk to me about where we should be, and then let's talk about just the attack. It just seems like that every time we turn around, that there's less and less, and there's more attack taking place, especially during Black History Month.
Well, the attacks are a matter of history repeating itself. Okay, we are talking about critical race theory, and most white people can't even spell it, let alone know what it means. We're trying to ban books in school libraries. Well, we saw that same thing happening in the monkey trial when the argument was over evolution versus creation. So, I mean, it's history repeating itself. And then we see, voter suppression. And I always remind people, if you go back and look at what happened following the Civil War, when we had the Reconstruction, we had blacks doing many things. We had 2 black senators come out of the state of Mississippi. We had South Carolina with the first superintendent of public instruction, in spite of the fact that throughout the South, there was very strict laws on the book banning the teaching of free slaves how to read or write. And we know the story of Frederick Douglass learning and tricking his white partner with cookies to help him learn to read so that he was able to go on. But Carter G. Woodson is the magnificent story that we don't talk enough about this man, you know, and it bothers me that he was alive in my lifetime. He died in 1950. By 1957, they had built the Carter G. Woodson Junior High School in my neighborhood, and I attended that high school named after him. And one of the highlights of his career was that he received the Joel Elias Spingarn Award, which for black people was the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize. And I went to the Joel Elias Spingarn High School, the same one that Elgin Baylor went to, and the same one they brought people from across the country to. It was a high school unique because we had faculty that were PhDs, and the reason we had PhDs in high school that should have been teaching in college was the glass ceiling was there, and they wouldn't let them teach at the university level. If they couldn't teach at Howard or a black institution, most of them worked in the government, in the U.S. Postal Office, and it was known as the Postal Plantation because there were so many educated people working in it. So Carter G. Woodson didn't start high school until he was 20, yet he was the second black to receive a PhD from Harvard University in education. He taught over school. He studied in Sorbonne. And this man wrote 12 books. He started off with books like The History of the Negro Church, The Education of the Negro, and then we know around 1939 he wrote a famous book that a lot of us, if we haven't read, we should have, The Miseducation of the Negro, because he realized how we were being miseducated. And one of his favorite books that I have is his book on Negro orators and their orations. Huge compilation. But he started the, what at first was the Society for the Study of Negro Life and History, I believe around 1915. In 1916, it was legally established as the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. It produced the Negro Journal, and it still functions today. When he died unmarried and without family, he willed his estate to the association, and they have produced all kind of teaching tools for kids in school. We started with Black History Week. We expanded to Black History Month. Of course, it's the shortest month in the year. And the irony of it is that with all of that, so many of us know so little of our history. And so that's why this week in my editorial, I talk about the significance of acknowledging the attack on Black History Month, which is taking place through all these things we're talking about. At the same time, it says the attack on Black History Month and what we must do. And the reality is we were educating our own in our homes, in our churches, in our schools. We were doing this. We were educating ourselves back when I was coming along and we didn't even have a library in the community. I had to stand in the snow to wait for the bookmobile in a block-long line to get in and then come back 2 weeks later just to get a book. And we got the internet, and today we are pathetically behind as a people in terms of reading skills for our students in elementary school. You know that as a teacher, Dr. Thompson. And they have taken cursor out, which we had to learn on those big 3 lines. We learned how to write our name and bring the lowercase letter to the second line and all that. They don't teach that anymore. Everybody is texting, and you're not even learning proper grammar because you're using shorthand texting language. And if you had to sit down and write a letter or a piece that had a adverb, a noun, a pronoun, an adjective, and dissect the sentence, they just will take you out and shoot you at a shooting squad. So what we're trying to do this month, my goal is to get us reconnected. There are fewer and fewer of us reading. And at the time that we're talking about 196 years of the black press, we are down to about 200 black papers where we used to be 600 or 700. And we're not trying to make people read and ignore social media, but you need to do what we're doing. We produce the paper in print and we put it online. And so I know I said a lot here, but I just want us to get our mindset so that we don't start arguing. We need to look at the example that Georgia gave. The more they set up traps to stop voter participation, that drive that black votes matter, to educate people, we still got those 2 senators in spite of every effort from changing the state laws and all the tricks they did. And I want people to understand that everything they're doing today is what they did in 1898 and 99. So by the year 1900, we no longer had blacks in the Congress, the last black congressman at that point was John Roy Lynch. My great uncle was one of the congressmen in the 1890s, the first and only one from North Carolina. And from 1900 until 1921, when Oscar DePriest was elected in Chicago, we didn't have any blacks in the Congress. Today, we got over 50 black members of the Congressional Black Caucus. I remember when they were trying to start it and they couldn't get but 12 people in the room. And the only time they would get together would be to take a picture. And I was there when they did the first meeting. I was there 50 years ago when Ozzie Davis was the first speaker. And his theme was, after the murder of Dr. King and Malcolm X, and it looked like everybody that we looked at was being killed, he stood up and said, it's the plan and not the man. We need to get back and understand what's going on, because we're being sidetracked with all kind of gadgets and gifts and social stuff that doesn't count.
Well, you know, Dr. Warren, there's a couple of things. There's a question on here that says, where's the black church? What civil rights are they pushing? But before you answer that question, you know, in the scripture it says that we will be able to do greater works. And when I dissect that, you know, before, back in the day when I was growing up, when you had to make a phone call, you're away from home, you had to get out and put a dime. That's how far I go back. In the payphone. And then when you ran it out, you had to put some more dimes in. And then as I got older, before they got rid of the payphones, it was a quarter. So I look at the greater works is that a lot of this technology is allowing us to reach people all over the world from one location. But again, just like TV was invented for the church, and we called it the one-eyed demon, and we didn't want it. And so because of that, they had to find something to do with that, and now we have TV, and now we can't even get on the network without millions of dollars. So I think that it's about using the technology and using what is out there for the good, and not being sidetracked with the devilment or the confusion that people want to get us caught up in. Use it as a tool for good. Just like, you know, some years ago, we didn't have a Voice and Viewpoint app. But now we got an app, so not only do they can read it on a computer, but they can read it on the phone and get up-to-date news. So I think that we can do greater works. We just have to use it for good.
Well, there are churches doing that, but there are mega churches that are doing it, you see. And people like, for instance, Shadow Mountain with David Jeremiah. You know, the reason he has such a large following is because of the substantive nature of how he teaches. And he's not the first one to teach like that. Fred Price built that whole church because at one point when he was just a Baptist pastor, he wasn't getting very much done. And then he met Kenneth Hagin, Dad Hagin, and he and people like Copeland. They came under Hagin and they started understanding how to really teach the word so that people would be reached. It was Jesus who said what you just said when he told them, and greater works than these shall ye do. And that was because of the empowering and the anointing of the Holy Spirit. One thing that's missing in our struggle today, we've always had people lynched and hung. That's why Nina Simone wrote the song about strange fruits. And people tried to censor and stop her because it was black men hanging from trees instead of fruit. And nobody liked that. But you see, the problem with the struggle today is that we are looking to the law to change things. In the days of Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, the first order of business was prayer. Everything that took place was led in prayer. And we done got so educated today in outreach, we don't believe in praying, and nothing happens without prayer. You know, we say in the church, more prayer, more power. No prayer, no power. And the church has started to yield its position, which was based on the righteousness and the teachings of Christ. It starts to yield the concept of truth and righteousness to the idea of political correctness, trying to win people in the wrong way. It's not the gadgets and the games that draw people, it's the word that draws people. Christ said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. And going back even before he was born in the flesh, when the people were attacked by the serpents in the wilderness, God told Moses, put a brass serpent on a stick and hold it up. And everyone who looks up to that serpent would be healed. And the irony, does not the scripture say that God will confound the wisdom and take the foolishness that makes it wise.
Mhm.
Today, the symbol of medicine, worn on every doctor's jacket along with their Hippocratic oath, the symbol is two serpents on a stick,
Yep.
on a brass pole. That's a precursor. And so we want change, but we don't want to apply ourselves to prepare for how we go about change. It was prayer that freed Great Britain, that freed India from Great Britain, and led to the creation of two countries there. Now we have Pakistan that's, that's Islam or Muslim, and India that's Hindu, and a whole bunch of other things that are there. But we don't want to talk about prayer. And the Bonner Institute is showing that while there are fewer people going to church today post-pandemic, because so many rather be on Zoom, the interest in God has gone up, but the place for the teaching of the word is being minimized because the church is being corrupted. So this is our problem. The absence of prayer following the cities led to more breakdown of families, okay? And then after the breakdown of families, we had the whole pre-love movement, which led to the AIDS epidemic, which led to all the other things that are going on. And history has shown us that 21 civilizations in the history of man have collapsed from within, including Rome with all its powers. And so we need to wake up. And we are living in end times, but that doesn't mean that we have to go hopeless and act like the world's going to end.
Yeah.
You know, what just happened in Turkey and Syria could have happened here.
Yeah.
Okay? And
Yeah.
so,
So my
Chief, go,
So I
please.
want to go back to the question. It says, where is the church and what civil rights are they pushing right now?
Well, my answer, let me tell you in the beginning of my answer that I don't belong to any denomination, and so there's nobody that they can call me on to suspend me. I have two ordinations, and they're all legitimate and valid. The church is derelict. The church is not doing what it should be doing. The pastors are struggling to survive because most of them are living off the church rather than living with the church. And I believe that when you do the word and what God called you to do, you don't have to worry about your income. But they have swapped the meaning of 2 Corinthians 5:7. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says we walk by faith and not by sight. And we got preachers walking today by what they can see. We got members who will leave a church if they hear something that they don't like. So we got a whole nation of wandering worshipers roaming around the place. And it is the destruction of religion, along with the destruction of the family, that sets the stage for the collapse of a nation. And we're moving down that path. And so I blame the churches. They're not, one or two might be doing some things, feeding some people and having some programs, and they probably can come and criticize me and say, well, if you so on key, why don't you have A, B, and C? I'm not in the ministry for the satisfaction of people. I'm in the ministry because I was called to it, and I'm going to do what he says no matter what it costs. And I try to separate that, but yet it's included in the paper because we're a Christian publication. And we're not afraid of the gospel, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter in the 1st verse. We're not afraid of it. And if we collapse because we are attacked, then so be it. We've had churches go down, and you remember probably about 10 years ago, they were scrambling to amend their bylaws so they could get some legal protection because they were afraid that gay couples were going to come and demand weddings and that they were going to be sued if they wouldn't do one. Well, that's absurd. The Constitution in the First Amendment talks about, it says that Congress shall make no laws abridging the freedom of religion. That means that we will have no state religion. And so we just got a lot of cowards in the pulpit. We got a lot of hypocrites in the congregation. And the thing is, don't get mad with me. Read Psalms 51 as David did and acknowledge your sins and your transgressions ever being before you and ask God for forgiveness and to get a new start.
And I want to do a precursor or a disclaimer to say that if this ain't you, don't take it personal. This is for everybody else that might be fine. If you find something that hits you, just say ouch and go ahead and move forth and correct it. The one thing about it is that it's so true that nowadays there's a lot of entertainment that takes place in the church, and people go to the church that's entertaining the best. But I think more we're seeing the churches that are being consistent in the word and developing their congregation not to just be members, but to be actual ministers of the gospel and share the gospel. They're still growing.
Yes,
They're still
every day.
growing. And the thing about it is that I know several pastors that literally um, don't worry about money because it's not because they have a big church or anything like that. I've watched pastors grow small churches into very large congregations, but the consistent thing that we found out that those pastors are givers. Number one, those pastors have a plan for discipleship and to literally have people in action. Now, when we look at the Black history, one of the things that we're facing is that the church used to be the hub
It was.
for Black history and civil rights movement, but now it doesn't seem like they're the hub. We don't have very few churches have oratorical contests. Very few churches will take a stand on civil rights movement and march and do anything. And then a lot of churches don't even have those type of meetings there anymore.
Well, they've been frightened. Many of the people think that to say anything about government or law is a violation of their 501c3 status, which it is not. Okay, and so they have been frightened into being inactive. And you know, when I look at the churches um, um, uh, that have depended upon the dollar more than on the word, and it's always disturbing to me. I've been in the ministry for 21 years. I've never taken a salary for preaching. I don't believe in charging people for the services that we perform. Um, and the only time I've taken a payment for a funeral is because the family had been charged by the mortuary, and I wasn't going to let them keep the money when I could take the money and give it to someone else. So we're not where we should be in terms of priorities. We got churches that don't believe in tithing, and they argue with people about that. Okay, and their churches have closed down. We got the small churches getting big buildings, like we just saw one happen, because they don't have the members. Their time is gone, and they haven't made any provision to move ahead. And I think that when you put the word first, the rest of it comes. The quality of life improves. Oh, you know, some people going to click us off here and say, you know, we came to hear about the social issues and we don't want to hear about that stuff. And that's okay. But you're the very people who called me in the middle of the night, and you call me when you're at the mortuary, and you call me when you don't know what to do next, you know. And God is not an ATM machine that you throw in a prayer and wait for a moment and an answer pops out. So, no, we're here to get information out, but we also want people to realize that our actions are godly based. And if that's in conflict with you, then you have to exercise your freedom of choice right under the First Amendment. You can go elsewhere.
Well, but you know, one of the things about it is that during African American History Month, we have to start looking back at the importance that the church played in the civil rights movement, in education, in moving things forward, and then ask the question, what are we lacking now? Because a lot of times, like you read the poem, and but now a lot of our kids still are in the dark about black poets and black authors and things of that nature. But normally that took place when we were growing up, and if we didn't learn it anywhere else, we learned it in the church.
Well, let's remember something about the church, because George Washington Carver Booker T. Washington, rather, is a real example of people saving money to help him, you know, get started with what. It was not uncommon in the South for churches to take up a collection on a monthly basis to send to that one person in the congregation that got a chance to go off to school. As a matter of fact, George Walker Smith, the late Reverend George Walker Smith, was a perfect example of this, because his family was sharecroppers that lived in houses with dirt floors, and yet the white folks liked him enough that people rallied and sent him off to get an education, and he ended up being educated in the Presbyterian movement and accepted, and it all led him to being here and to a quality of life. That's why he was such a supporter of the United Negro College Fund. And so, but the church today, Reverend Thompson, could play a role in this attack on Black History Month. We don't need money to open the church up and on the weekends have classes on Black history for our students. One of my disappointments in San Diego in the past 30-some years has been the Association of African American Educators, who are people, many of whom have retired. They got their checks, they got their health, nobody can bother them. And yet, when you talk to a lot of them about getting involved, reaching out to students, volunteering and stuff, a lot of the attitudes is, I already done that. And I'm not saying everybody, so I don't need y'all to start a little letter writing campaign. Not that I could care less, but I have kept waiting to see us step back into history and do what we want to do. Let me show you something about the Somali community. And you go over to the area of Horace Mann School. There was a time that school was like a United Nations in terms of the mixture of students, and I think some 19 or 20 languages spoken there. But right down University Avenue, in the community where they live, they had a community school after school that those children had to attend and learn their Islamic culture and customs, okay? The Jews did that. When they had the little stores that controlled our community, they had stores on the weekend at the synagogue for their kids to teach them the Torah, okay? We had, what did we have in the summer? Did not we have Baptist training unions every Sunday afternoon? And then we had Vacation Bible School in the summer. And we always, and who was making money off us? The white company, the Cook Publishing Company, that for years sewed us up and gave us the white covered characters in the comic books that we taught from. And to black people, where was it? Memphis? Was it the Church of God in Christ? Or those that rose up and took over and did their own publishing companies and brought it in? I mean, the guy who owned Welch's grape juice got rich off of selling Welch's to us until we realized that we don't have to have Welch's. You know, we can buy grape juice. We can buy a loaf of shepherd's bread at the store and break it up and serve communion instead of, we don't have to have these programs for the service every Sunday. We used to do it. We fell into all of those things that they used to do instead of just coming together to worship.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things about where we're at today is that, you know, if we know better, we have to begin to do better. And I kind of want to transition as we're looking at African American History Month. A lot of things have taken place, and what disturbs me is when we have African American people that are in key positions in your city or in your state, and they have spoken up. They have stood up. They have made suggestions. They have written things. And then everything that they contributed, when it goes out, it becomes sterilized and it becomes cleaned up to the way that the people that are at the head want to do it. But then when they're challenged, they throw the African Americans underneath the bus. And I think that we have to begin to not allow that to take place. This recently, there were some things that came out and press releases that came out, and when it was challenged, you know, they were quick to throw the African American person underneath the bus, and literally that African American person had very little to do with that press release whatsoever.
Well, see, that African American person had a miseducation, as Carter G. Woodson said, and they were unread, okay? I always tell black people in position of leadership that one of the first books you should read is The Prince by Machiavelli, okay? And one of the lessons you take away from that is that a person who is in leadership should never lose contact with the place from which they come, because the leadership scenario is designed to separate you from your base with all kinds of false titles and positions. And then once they get you there and they've used you to the extent they can, they know they can discard you because you no longer have a connection to the roots from which you came. And so we're always talking about having black people run for office. That's not the issue. It's having people of character and commitment who want to serve. And they're not going to always be black. I wish they were. But if we're going to be true to humanity, we can't be reverse racist, okay? And I mean, because we got black people that don't like black people, let alone don't like some white people.
Well, we saw that in Memphis.
Yes, that was a perfect example there. But that wasn't the first time.
Exactly.
because we got always had black cops who beat up on black people, and they were worse than the white cops. I guess they had to show them that I can be more like you than like them. I don't know how their minds work. But the important thing is, let's remember something about Memphis. You got a black female police chief. You got a police force that's 59% African American, and you got a population that's 65% black. So you had the black ingredients for success. And we have those cities, like in Missouri, where we put in office a black district attorney. You got a black district attorney in Georgia that's about to indict Trump on the stuff that he did. We got the black district attorney in New York that went ahead with what she could do in terms of civil stuff. And so there are black people who are committed, but there are also a number of black folks in office who have drank the Kool-Aid and who have forgotten where they came from. And I don't think we spend time arguing with them. That's my point, my editorial. Let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to the word and the studying and seeing what can we do. You remember 20 years ago, Dr. Thompson, here in San Diego, we had a rites of passage program for black males.
Yeah.
And we had mentors working with them. We had black men in Black Men and Women United that were going into schools as mentors, being father figures to these kids. And what did the system do? They went back and discovered, well, let me see how many of y'all had a prior record. And if you had a prior record as a felon, then under state law, you can't be near children.
Yeah.
So we had to go and get a waiver of the law to get people into the schools to work. And we've always had a shortage of black people. It used to be that the parents couldn't be in the school because they were working two jobs. But that's not the case always. So many times they're not interested. And we have grandparents getting involved because they have been given the job of raising the kids of their dysfunctional and missing children who dump the kids on them. So then they have to get involved. So we got a lot to deal with, Dr. Thompson, during this month. And I'm ready to talk about all of it. Like when you talk about why there are no black men in the homes. Okay, let's not miss the point that, first of all, black men couldn't find jobs. That's why black men like my grandfather in North Carolina went to work on the railroad as a waiter and worked on one for 44 years, because that's the place where he could draw a check and the crackers in his hometown couldn't stop him from buying property and owning land and the jobs that he could do. That's what we miss, you see. And now we're talking about discrimination and we can't get a job. Well, I want to tell you as an employer who happens to be black, I would happily hire some black people if they showed up. But the problem is most of them don't want to show up these days. And so if I hire a Martian or alien and I'm a multiracial employer, then I got some lip from people who ain't doing nothing for anyone but themselves. And so I believe call it like it is, pull the covers off it, be real if we're going to stand up and be involved in the cause, okay? You know, Thomas Paine, who wrote The Crisis during the Revolutionary War, one of the things he wrote in one of his issues was these words. He said, "The summer patriot and sunshine soldier shall soon vanish from the surface of his country, but they who endure until the end deserve the love of all mankind." We got a whole bunch of summer patriots and sunshine soldiers today instead of the warriors that we had in the days of Dr. King and the marches and what we did then.
And with that being said, I think that, you know, I'm never going to say that we got to go ahead and start from the beginning or start over. I think that we have to start right where we're at, and we have to begin to look at where we can make inroads. We still have some young, passionate young people that we can continue to reach out to and to mentor. And then those people, like, say, for instance, like AAAE, I think one of the struggles that AAAE has is that when I first started in the district some 30 plus years ago, it was the space to be. Young and old alike was AAAE, and education was the place. But as the younger people start coming into education, there was nothing that really drew them to that organization. There was nothing that said, if you're in this organization, if somebody comes up against you, we have your back and we have the power to do it. And I like to send a special shout out during Black History Month to, what's her title? a deputy chief or whatever of education for the United States, Cindy Martin, I would say that she should be awarded for single-handedly destroying a lot of things for African American and Latino children in San Diego Unified School District. It is going to be years to come before they recuperate from that. And the sad thing about it is there is a superintendent in power right now that can correct it, but does he have enough boldness, and is he conscious enough to say, you know what, my predecessor did a lot of things wrong, and I cannot be afraid to correct what was right, what was wrong, and make it right. If you can have, and I will say this, and this is not hating up against anyone, if you can have a department for a community that only makes up 5% of unified school district, and you can wave flags and everything for that one set of community, but you cannot do the same for black and brown kids and literally lift them up and establish programs that are going to take them to the next level and provide advocacy and mentorship to those people, then my question is, why are you in position?
Well, see, you know, I spent a lot of years of my life in education. I mean, I helped write, was there for elementary, secondary ed, higher ed, school lunch, handicap, all of that stuff that took place. And having been a member of the National School Boards Association Board of Directors, I dealt with school districts all over this country. I visited them, I spoke with them, I saw what they were doing. I remember there were school districts that would not even participate by choice in elementary and secondary ed because they didn't want any government influence in terms of what they were doing. My concern today is we need to focus on those kids where they are, get them in a school, get them in somebody's home after school, whoever has the time, but we need to reinvigorate our commitment to them. And studies have shown that wherever that's done, whether it be Chicago, New Jersey, LA, wherever people have given them the love and the support, they have been able to turn those kids around, and they want to learn, they want to achieve, as opposed to being told that you are hopeless and nothing can happen.
Yeah, and Dr. Warren, I want to say this. One of the saddest statements that I just recently heard was an African-American teacher, a visiting teacher, a teacher that goes around and helps other teachers be successful, heard a Caucasian teacher refer to a black girl who's 6 years old as the violent black girl. And so she tried to help the teacher understand that it was wrong. She was like, well, could you tell me what child you're talking about? She said, yes, that one over there, the violent black girl. And she said, well, you know, that's inappropriate to refer to her like that. And I'm suggesting that you don't refer to her as that. She is a young child. So guess what happened? Clutch My Pearls ran and told her white counterpart that she felt threatened by the black teacher that was trying to correct her. So so this black teacher who served that community, went to that school, was now banned from that school. And yet the white teacher was still allowed to be there. Of course. You know, even though they never addressed the concern that the black teacher had. And so a lot of educators, especially African American educators, many times won't step up because they don't get the support when they do step up for correction.
But you know, if Carter G. Woodson had functioned that way, we wouldn't have anything that he left us.
Exactly.
If Mary McLeod Bethune had functioned that way, we would have never got Bethune-Cookman and everything else that's come. Okay? So we need to get back to people who are more committed to the cause. You know, Jesse Owens shamed Hitler in that Olympics, and what did he do? He came home to persecution. Here's a man designated the fastest human being on earth, and the only job he could get back home was pulling a plow or racing a horse or anything that was degrading. Joe Louis, tremendous prize fighter, but he beat that white guy, and at the end, he wasn't educated. They stole all of his money. At the end of his days, what did we have? We had him in Caesar's palace with a statue of him, and you know, that whole family gave him a job to the end of his days so he could stand and greet people. That's as sad as putting a wooden Indian in front of the store. So we're going to kill a real one, then we're going to put a wooden one out there because we don't have to worry. We're going to name all of our teams after them, the Braves and the Redskins. The Native Americans have a right to be angry.
Yeah.
Okay? Suppose somebody decided, let's have a team called the Niggers and see how that goes over. Okay? And let's match them up against the slaves and see how that goes down. Okay? Or let's have a team called the Wasp. Okay? The white Anglo-Saxon. Let's see how that goes down. So name calling and denigration of people is okay for other folks by those who are perceived as being in power, the oppressors. We have all of that. Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth talks about that. And I'm throwing out titles of books and things that people should have read, and I'm saying here's the time to go and read again. Take the time. That's one of the big attributes I missed with the late brother Robert Tambusi. He was a nationalist. He was well read, and he always brought the word from the knowledge of what was said in the village to us so that we could understand it moving forward. We don't have to stop here, folks. We got young people. Let me be fair. We got a whole bunch of young people committed to the cause. Yeah. Let us not forget that it was a sister that was a biochemist that discovered the vaccine for COVID-19. We're still making history. It was really a black man who gave us the first open heart surgery instead of us praising Bernard because he did a transplant. But he stood on the shoulders of the ones who already done so. And we would not have blood transfusion today if it wasn't for Charles Drew.
We wouldn't have the air conditioning.
And what happened to Drew? He died as a result of a car accident on a road in North Carolina because they wouldn't take him to a white hospital. And so he was the one that created the blood transfusion that they were given. And they let him die for the lack of it. Yes, you're right. When you talk about Latimer, you talk about the air brakes, you talk about, we give all of this light to Alexander Graham Bell for the light, but it was the brother there that helped them understand how to make the light. Yeah. We give all this credit to Admiral Perry talking about the North Pole, but, it wasn't him.
Henry.
It was the brother that had gone there 2 years before to live with the people, Matthew Henson, and he was the guide, and he was the one that literally picked what's his name up and carried him to the pole because he sure couldn't walk in his condition, frostbite. But we ignore who the real heroes are.
Yeah, and literally, history state that he never made it to the pole. He got to close enough, but it was Henson that actually planted the flag.
Of course it was. You look at the big plantations in the South. The white people might have owned them, or the capital structure. It was black labor that built it. Yeah. And you look at Washington, D.C., who laid out Washington, D.C.? A black mathematician named Benjamin Banneker, who laid out everything. So we have been hidden away. And, in the 60s and 70s, the brothers and sisters in the movement used to say it's his story. And it took us a while to understand that history was his story, not our story. And so we had to start telling our story.
And with that being said, we can't be mad about anybody else until we as a people take charge of our destiny, go back to our first love, and begin to do the work and do it fearlessly, unapologetically, and that is how we're going to move forward. Not to do it out of anger or revenge, but just based on the trueness that there are young people coming up today that we have to set an example for. And if they don't see us fight, if they see us backing down, many times they will take that same stance. We have a great legacy that showed that we had to fight, even when it was unpopular, and even when it cost people their lives. We still fought on. And so this Black History Month, we want to encourage you all to be about it, not just talk about it, but be about it. Go about realizing that your voice does matter. And if you really, truly want to see a change, be the change that you want to see, not just talk about it.
And don't be afraid to learn. If we got a request to have a weekend session at Voice and Viewpoint on Black history, we would do it in a heartbeat because there's so much I want you to know. Last week I had an editorial following the murder in Memphis, and the title of it was Dying While Black. And I reminded people that the last poets who were the original rappers, okay, and one of the songs they had that when they spoke about, as they did spoken word first, this one says, it's all right to die for a cause, but not just because. And right now, we're dying just because.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to die, let's die for a cause.
Yeah.
Let's die doing something. As a slave says, let me die standing as a man than being on my knees as a slave and as someone oppressed, okay? And so this is what we have to get back in our spirit. We have to kindle it because there is no power that can overcome an idea whose time has come. And we have let our ideals be anesthetized and fade away. As Marcus Garvey said at one point, the sleeping giant's been awakened. Well, we've yawned and a lot of us are laying back down. So it's time to get up and get busy. And I thank you so much for listening.
Well, with that being said, we want to remind you that Friday is the last day that you're going to actually be able to get tickets for the Voice and Viewpoint Gala. I believe that we might already be sold out, but we're counting numbers and we're looking at numbers. But we want you to know that we will be airing it live via the Voice and Viewpoint pages. And so stay tuned. This is from the Desk of the Editor with Dr. John Warren.